And then some other links here you guys can look at. And when I pass the slides out, there's that GraphQL thing which I mentioned. This, so you can, yeah, my demo is based on this. You can write stuff over here, provide your variables, tell it where to go, use get or post, and then you can also edit some headers. So you have like an API key-based authentication, which this is the key that I use for work. You can use this to interactively develop your queries, and then whatever the embedded you use for writing your apps.
One thing I'd like to say about that tool too is that it's built on Electron, so it's actually really easy to pull out and just make graphical part of your web app. A coworker of mine did that actually on one of our GraphQL projects.
Yeah, so GraphQL is it's a web app, and then this is just a version that's embedded in Electron, which makes it a desktop app. But yeah, people do that a lot of times. So it's really easy now because there's actually an Express thing that you can install, and then just put it on a route and it's magic. Turn off the font, by the way.
You don't want to leave it there?
I don't want to leave it there. It's up to you. And then this thing is a list of awesome things. It's just a repo. If you make something, make a pull request to this document, and it'll probably get into this list. So just a ton of resources. And then, of course, the GraphQL website. It was originally made by Facebook. That's what that is. That's a spec there. Let me just show you how short the spec is. Well, it's not short per se. It's much shorter than some things. Let's put it like that. All right, demo. Any questions before we get to this? Because next up, we're going to be very node specific. Okay. Okay, so I have a repo. I'll share that when I share the slides. I'll actually probably put the slides in the repo. In that repo, I have a variety of tags, numbered 1 through 6. If you go to any of those tags, you'll kind of see it evolve over time. So I'm going to start at 1. And what you're going to see here is this is just a bare bones Express application. I like to see my logs, and so I'm printing them out. It accepts JSON. It parses the body as JSON by default. I'm going to verify that it's working. Yeah, I'm running it in NodeMon over here, and then to verify that it's working, I can do localhost. This is not fine. Yeah, it does. I don't like the light. Oh, I renamed some things. But now, oh look, it's working. And then it also has another endpoint, which is /queried, and that's the thing that's doing the hard work, the graphical work. And it's just binding to perfect visual. And so here, we're using the GraphQL library, and there's this nice helper thing where you hand it your model, your model object, which is your root query, your query object, and then pass it the query that the user provided via the request. And there's some other arguments here, like I neglected to have support for variables, but it's like 2 positions over. And then you can give it called a root something or other. But basically what you could do here is whatever you put in this will get passed down to every resolve function. And so if you have authentication for your application, maybe it's from a header or something like that, get your header, put it in here, it's accessible to every resolve. And so you could use that to see who is this user, or maybe you look up the session first, and then you pass that in there. Who is this user, and then are they allowed to do whatever it is they're asking to do. So that's another thing that GraphQL does not do. It doesn't do authentication or authorization, but it makes it pretty easy to do it if that's what you need. However you need to do it. And then, so it's going to call that. It's going to go do stuff. It returns a promise. And that promise fulfills. If it's successful, then I'm just going to, well, going to make errors serializable. And then I'm going to just send it back to the user. And then if anything happened inside of here, which wasn't a handled error by GraphQL, it's just going to catch it down here and send it back. So pretty standard promise stuff. And then my model, oh, one other thing first. For this demo, my data is living just in JSON files, which I load in when the app starts. But as we already mentioned, in the resolve functions, you can make calls out to other things, return promises, you can do basic stuff very easily. So in my JSON files, I have a users file, which is just information about users. I have groups, which are companies in the office of the universe. And then, I think they're right, but I wasn't sure, was Dwight actually, wait, no, was Jim a manager when it was Bender Mifflin, not Saber? Does anybody remember? I could have looked it up, but it was last night.
I feel like he might have been, but was that, did he do the co-manager with Michael around that time? Or was that after Saber?
I think it was after Saber. Anyway, we could update this data if someone had strong opinions and a reference to something better. And then, so this is pretty standard stuff that come from relational world. These might represent tables in a database. And so this is just a through table of user to group, which is company in this case. And then the role that they had at each company.
Quick question.
Yes.
You go back one file. Yeah. Is there a significance to the underscore in front of Node? Does that make it a hidden?
It was because numbers don't really make sense when you're doing these two tables. I don't know if you've ever tried to manually put things into a database using their IDs.
I could see where it would be useful. I was just curious about the underscore in front of Node.
No. The structure of this data is completely arbitrary and chosen by me. And I put the note there so that I didn't get confused and make sure that I didn't repeat things. Okay? And so here we get to what we're interested in. Down here at the bottom, I am exporting a GraphQL schema. And query, I have a core thing called query, and points to query type, which is this, which is a GraphQL object. Okay? And GraphQL objects have a name. There's a way to provide some other metadata, which I neglected to do. And then fields. And your fields can either be an object or it can be a function which returns an object, which is useful when you have things in the same file so you don't get, so you can handle circular dependencies. Basically, it'll wait till the next and then call them. So that you can refer to things here, because this would get read synchronously that aren't defined yet until down here. So I have in this version of this demo, I have one field called users, and it is of type GraphQL list, which wraps the user type, which is defined down here. And here's my resolve function. And so in this resolve function, I need to do whatever it is, make a call to a database, do something which returns a list of users. And this is where I mentioned, if you want to go in the least efficient but most straightforward path, just grab everything and let GraphQL take care of filtering it down to just what they want. Or there's additional stuff in the info here that you can see about what fields are actually requesting, which you could use to generate a query or something. Okay, so this is going to return the list of users, which in this case is just the users, because they're just required straight from the JSON up there. Now my user type is another GraphQL object. It's called user. It has the following fields: ID, which is a non-null string, meaning that if you get a user object, it's guaranteed to have an ID. It may not have a first name, last name, or email. In this case, it does because I put the data. But you could use this to give some assurances to your clients, or people who are consuming your API, that if you request this thing and get something back, it's going to have at least these things. Otherwise, other things may be wrong. And if it also, so there's a lot of validation that goes on. It validates your query, and then it also validates the results. And if your thing resolves with something that does not have an ID, and you declare it to be non-null, it'll have an error that your user could respond to. Okay, so blah, blah, blah. Okay. This gets all the data that's exposed right now. I could get just their ID and their first name. I think I have, and I have also in this, nope, not yet. It's in the next version. So let's go on to the next version, because this one's not very interesting, unless there's any questions about this so far.
All right, Ethan, can I get that interface on the website?
What interface? This thing? Yeah, I have links in the slides. Okay. Let me also show the ERD as it exists right now. So I'm going to use the GraphQL Viz program, or CLI tool. Okay, so this is dot syntax, if anybody is familiar with that. And then I'm just going to type it in dot. That's the representation of my model right now. So this was there before. This is new now in this version. Let's show that. So the user type didn't change at all. The query has a new field called user. It is of type user type, not wrapped in a list, meaning that it's going to return one object. And it has arguments. You can specify as many arguments as you want, and they would be accessible in your resolver via the second argument, which is I've been calling args in this case. And it's just a QI pair lookup. And then there's other metadata that you can provide. And in my resolve, I spelled context wrong. And it's just going to find the user that has the ID that is provided, and if not, it just returns undefined. And so if I say user ID 1 that exists, if I say that does not exist, and if I give something, it needs to, my argument was declared as being a string, non-null string. So if I give a number, it's going to use an error. So there's in addition to the data, which you might have seen, there is an error key which can appear by itself or alongside the data, and it just can give you information about what we're on. Unfortunately, it doesn't really tie too well into what particular path in your query produced the errors. So maybe there's something in the GitHub repo. I'm sure people will complain about that. But we can get users by ID. We can also get users, the list still. And you look here, it looked at the introspection and it saw all my types, and so it's able to give me auto completion. And then I can also show you how to do a fragment. So this was in the slides, but here's my user fields fragment, and I'm just going to provide it to these things. So let's leave off email. For this one. These guys don't have it, this guy does. So it's the combination of all the fragments and the fields.
So the idea would be that you just want to create a bunch of fragments and then maybe store them in your front end code or wherever you're going to call your GraphQL from, right?
Yeah, you could. Maybe you have a variety of components which have different opinions about things that should be fetched, and you write your data abstraction layer such that those views provide whatever they need to that, and then it just smashes them together and makes one request and then returns stuff to whoever asks for it. And so speaking about front-end things, GraphQL was originally made for use with React. So I think that's great. There's something called Relay, which is kind of like the data abstraction layer between React and APIs. So that's the query language that was made for that. Okay. So that's sort of interesting. Let's get on to some of our other data. So let's rerun this so get a more recent view. Okay, so I added a group entity, and I made links to it from the root query. Groups have ID, name, description. Just yet, there's no association between users and groups. Let's see if there's anything interesting in the groups part. Just returns a list, just finds the list. Same as for the users. Nope. Not interesting. Groups, group, users. So I can get all my groups. Also to demonstrate the aliases. Pretty powerful if you think about everything that's doing. Otherwise, you'd have to probably make 3 requests to get this stuff unless you had, a specific enough API for what you're asking for. And we didn't have to make anything that is specific to answering this question. Instead of being a query language. Okay. Next. Let's associate users with groups. So I think this is where it starts getting more interesting. Let's generate our UID. Query has users and groups, just like before. And now there's a through table between users and groups. And so for a user, you can get the list of their memberships, or you can get a membership by specifying a group ID, and then you can go the other way as well. You can, for a group, you can get a list of all the members of that group, or a specific member, if you know or suspect that they are. So let's do some queries. Well, let's look at the models first. Okay, so we saw user first. How do we relate things together? Memberships. List of group member types. So there's that through thing, which is not actually strictly necessary. That's just how I chose to represent this. But I could have my through table kind of be transparent if I wanted to, except that I know there's something coming up that I want to have that explicitly better for. And then, what is it doing? It's just filtering the list of member objects where the user is the ID from the current context. So if you think about what happened, query, I asked for, I didn't make a query. Let me make a query. Okay, what this query does is, for each user, give me some information about them and give me all their membership groups, ID and name. So there's some duplicated data in here, but it answers that specific question for every single user. So Michael was a member of Granton, Sabre, although I don't know if he was technically an employee of Sabre. Was he? And he was also a member of the Michael Scott Paper Company. And there's other information about the other people there. But think about what it would take to get this information if you were hitting individual resource endpoints. So it's starting to get more powerful. And that query motivates discussion over here. So listing the users, which returns the list of users. Remember, that's the data from the users file. So this is basically the context in my result function, because I didn't do anything special to it. But down here, in my user type, when I'm listing the memberships, the ID, which is in the context here, is the user ID from the individual items in this list. And I'm just filtering the members, which is the items from this list, where the user equals whatever the user ID is from the context. And then, for this query, then I want to get the group. So let's jump over to, so this one will return the list of group member types, which is declared down here. It has the user field, which will just find the user that's specified in the context, well, that's in the context. So the user ID from here, and likewise the group. So it's just going to find the group, provide that, return a group type populated with that data, and then specify the projection on there, which is ID and name. And a little side note, so behind the scenes, what's going on? So when you make a query, it looks like this. You can either provide a GET request and then have a query GET param, which is a string which encodes for query, or you can do a post with a query, although it's really up to you however you want to translate it. That's just the convention. And then the query should be a string of the query, and then if you had variables, it would sit alongside the query. You could also provide it via form data. I'm choosing to do raw JSON because that's pretty easy to do. So in this case, this query is the introspection query. So that's all that this is doing behind the scenes. And then if we look at the logs for the server, what it got was got a post, a query, the body exactly like what we were sending to it. And this particular thing doesn't have one response, but it would or no, it would be the introspection for that particular query. This one would be this thing over here. Okay. Any questions about relating between models that are not referred to from the root query? So you can imagine that you have a database of users, and you knew their Twitter handles. You wanted to get, for each user, their 10 most recent tweets. To do that, you would have a tweet model, you would have a user model, and then your query would just be users, tweets, and then whatever fields you want from those. And behind the scenes, it would go to the database, get your users for each user, look up the Twitter handle, and then it would make a call out to Twitter, say, give me the 10 most recent ones, the list, populate my list, and then there it is. And then you could even go a little bit further and provide arguments to however many tweets to the requester wants.
So how are we going to figure out how many more likes a certain page has? As far as
it would be up to you. I mean, GraphQL doesn't answer your questions or provide the questions that you want answered, but it's a tool by which you can, via a common interface, specify your questions and then link various things up to answer those questions. Next. Okay. So I added the concept of roles, but I didn't associate numbers with them just yet. So groups have various roles. Let's see what those are. Okay, so Dunder Mifflin Scranton has 3 roles in this database: employee manager and sales. Pretty standard for a paper sales company. Sabre has the same ones. Micro Scott has an owner. And Shrew Farms has an owner as well. So this is not any different than things you've seen so far. So very simple relation. So let's illustrate something. So you noticed in the ERD there are cycles in the graph. So let's say for each group, list the roles, and there's also a link back to group. I don't know why you would ever do this, but you can if you want to. Why? Maybe you had your roles abstracted and they had some ID, and you reuse roles amongst different groups, and so you say, for each group, give me a list of roles and give me all the other groups that have that role. Maybe that's a valid question. That's not how I have it set up here, but you can answer all kinds of crazy kind of convoluted things right here in one query. And there might be some duplicated data, but if you knew what kinds of questions you wanted to answer, then you could provide the right fields with the right arguments to drill down into what you want a little more easily. Okay. Lastly, I'm going to relate numbers to roles. So the group has roles, numbers, also have, let's see, yeah, members have roles, and then you can also request a specific role for a member if you know what it's called, either by ID or name. And then the data changed slightly, and I am going not full normalization here, and I'm just embedding a list of roles, role IDs into my memberships. And okay, so real quick, let's look at the URM. Members just returns a list, but this list is the filter of members where the member roles list includes the ID of this current role. Otherwise, if you just filtered by the ID, then you would get memberships of ones that you weren't expecting in that role set. And then it's similar for when you want to go from a member to a list of roles. In this case, the list of roles is already right there on the member. And so we're just going to map that list, look up the role from the roles list by ID for each one. And then this is kind of interesting because up till now we've only seen one argument for a field, but here we have two optional arguments, meaning that you're expected to provide one of them, but there's not really a good way to say one of them or the other. At least not that I'm aware. There might be a way. And ignore my debugger statement, but it's saying if you provided an ID, go ahead and look up the role, or try to look up the role by looking in the roles list where the ID is the ID provided, and it's the group that the member belongs to. Otherwise, if they provided a name, look up the roles where the role name is what is provided, and the group is the member group. If they don't specify either one, it's just going to be null. And if it did find something, then if it did find something, meaning that for a particular member, you could specify a role that they don't belong to, but it could be a valid ID role. And since I'm not pushing this logic into a database query or something like that, I just need to ensure that the role that they specify is actually a valid role for that member. And then use role. So I have some other queries here. It might be interesting. It's not quite related to roles, but what this is doing is, let's find everyone who was in the Michael Scott Paper Company, which is ID 4, which I know somehow. Let's find all the salespeople from that company. Let's get the name of the role, should be sales. Let's find all the members of that role. Let's get their user. And then let's find what other groups they were part of and what roles they had in those other companies. So Michael Scott Paper Company in sales was Pam, and she is also, or was at one time, a member of Under Mifflin Scranton, Sabre, and White should be on this list. No, White wasn't in Michael Scott. Pam was the only salesperson in this database. Anyway. But that's pretty powerful, right? What this lets you do is, you represent the data however you want. This is just re-representing your data on top of it, providing some kind of virtual methods to answer specific questions, and then you let your app developers or consumers of your API figure out whatever question they want to ask and ask it of you. And you don't have to code things specific to whatever problem they're trying to solve. One more. Let's find any users, their name, their memberships, what group they were a manager in. So Michael was a manager in Scranton, Sabre, and well, he was a member of the Michael Scott Paper Company, but he wasn't a manager in Silver's home. Dwight was a sort of manager of Dunder Mifflin Scranton. It's up for debate. Jim was a manager in Sabre. Pam was never a manager. She had other important contributions. Okay. Yes, that was quite technical. I know. Okay. Any final questions? I will post the slides and the repo and links between the two of them. And for you guys to look at if you want. Hopefully it's somewhat informative. Please read the Learn section of the GraphQL.org website. It is very helpful. Browse through the list of awesome things, including language libraries and frameworks and things that make what I did here look unnecessary, depending how well your use case fits into what you're trying to do. Yeah, any questions? Yes.
So I've been here for so long, but I kind of realized how far from this is. But I'm curious, what front-end technology would you want there?
Whatever you want. So, you can of course write whatever, because it's just HTTP requests. And anything that can consume JSON and can manipulate strings and make requests, you can make top GraphQL. But there are, of course, a myriad of front-end libraries and tools to help you along the way, assuming you want to adopt whatever they're giving you. But more specifically, I don't know if you were here, but I mentioned it was originally developed to be used with React.